Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 324 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Today's episode is all about trying new things and being a late learner with my guest, Alison Hare. So welcome to a brand new episode in a brand new year of the Brilliant Balance podcast. I am delighted for you to meet today's guest. Alison Hare is a former sales executive turned lifestyle entrepreneur. She is the host of the award-winning, top-ranked podcast, Late Learner. And she is a personal coach for a very similar audience to mine. She works with professional women who are also mothers. She is a keynote speaker. She lives in Atlanta, where I spent a good chunk of my early adulthood. She is a mom of two. She is very happily married, and she is an absolute delight. I think you're going to love getting to know this woman, particularly because she has found this really important insight that she discovered just maybe in the last 5+ years of her own life. And she is in a similar life chapter to mine in her mid-40s. And the insight was that she is not done learning. In fact, when she gives herself permission to try new things and to learn new things, like it often feels like freedom. And I know that that's something that is such a compelling vision to you if you are a listener of this show, because we are all looking for those things that feel a little lighter, feel more like freedom, and can pull us toward new versions of ourselves, ones who sometimes we don't even meet until midlife. So Alison and I sat down on a day right before the holidays in December. We had an absolute snowstorm that picked up outside of my office in the middle of this interview, where I was just sure we were going to lose our Wi-Fi. Luckily, we did not. And we had such a great conversation about this insight that she discovered later in her life and how she's continued to pursue opportunities for learning as she navigates this chapter. I am excited for you to meet her and excited to see where you take this insight in your own life. So without further ado, please meet Alison Hare. Well, Alison, welcome to the Brilliant Balance Show.
I am so glad to be here, Cherylanne. Thank you.
I love doing this with you because I've talked to you so many times off the air that it'll be really fun to have this particular conversation on the air for everyone else to listen in on. So Let's kick this off with you. I would love for you to share a little bit about what you've been up to today. What's on your particular plate today?
Well, we are in the midst of December when we're recording this, and my kids are not at school. So I'm doing a little bit of a delicate balance of I am working, but my kids are continuously coming in and wanting some attention. So I'm doing a little bit of a balance of work on my stuff and also being present for them. So I've got a few calls on the book. So everything is kind of normal, just a little less. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what's going on today.
Yes. And since your work is kind of similar to my work in that you host a podcast and you coach women and, you have a creative requirement associated with your job, sometimes those days for me lend themselves well to doing some creative work that's less administrative. I can kind of get in and out of it as needed. Yeah.
I do not find that at all.
This hyper-focus skill that I have, right, is super critical in my ability to do that. Well, I want to share a little bit with the people listening about your backstory. I think you have just a fascinating life story that I've had the chance to get to know a little bit. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up. Let's start there.
Well, I'm one of 6 kids. I'm actually one of 7 kids. And so there were a lot of us around. And I think a great place to start is that my mother was a stay-at-home mom to 6 kids. And my father I guess he's still around. He was an international businessman. So he was born and raised in Lebanon. My mom was from Brooklyn. So very different cultures, right? And so my father was gone a lot and my mom kind of ran the show. And what I thought was interesting is I remember when I was 12 and I remember being in my family kitchen with my mom. And I remember like my head in my hands crying and my mom saying, Alison, what's wrong? And I was like, I am not good at anything. I'm not good at anything. I didn't play sports. I didn't, I was an average student. I wasn't the worst, but I wasn't the best. And I never really felt anything that I felt that I could excel at. And so I was just kind of coasting along in a world of mediocrity. And my mother just heartbroken of how do you help? Like, you're good at liking music, or something.
Adorable. Right.
And, but at the same time, I remember my mother always saying, never rely on a man to make money, always make your own. And I imagine it is because my mother did not take that choice. My mother, when she didn't go to college, she went to Europe to study her voice. She was an opera singer and this magnificent singer. And then she came back and met my dad, who was 14 years her senior and debonair and from another country, and kind of swept her off her feet. And they had all of these kids. My mom, kind of put all of those dreams on the shelf and kind of planted them directly on the heads of me and my sisters,
My goodness.
and said, never rely on a man to make money, always make your own.
Wow.
And so I had gone to college and I wanted to study psychology. And I started out as a psych major. I discovered my college had a radio station and it felt like all the lights in my body had turned on. And I always had this passion for music. And I took this voice and diction class and just, it felt like everything went from black and white to color.
Yes.
And I was like, this is what I want to do. I'm finally good at something. Mm-hmm. And, but again, when I got out of college and I went through college fine, right? Like I found my people, I found my tribe, I found what I was good at. And at every turn as a professional, I always picked the money. And when I left college, I said, I want to be a radio DJ. So I sent like this crappy, I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but this really crappy demo tape on a pile of pizzas. So I had a bunch of pizzas delivered with my resume and my demo tape to my favorite radio station. And they laughed and said no. And they, they enjoyed the pizza. And I ended up going in marketing and then kind of ending up in sales because I was like, I really want to make money. And I know that in radio, you typically are not going to make a lot of money.
Right.
But maybe later on I will pursue this. And every turn I picked the money. So I went into corporate sales and did a lot of things on the side. Like I would do Toastmasters. I had a music blog where I would interview and promote emerging artists, these incredible artists like Civil Wars and Amos Lee and Arrested Development and all of these amazing people that I just did for fun on the side.
Amazing.
And then about 5 years ago, I got a promotional email about starting a podcast. And I was like, all right, let me just start podcast. I didn't even look at the price. I didn't have any idea what I was going to talk about. I just knew I wanted to make an impact. And what had been happening through my work world is that the corporate world, I was very successful in. High 6-figure income. I earn the trips, the accolades, great. I can do this, on the side. I have all this creative energy and this stuff that I want to do, this meaningful work where I felt like I was selling software and payroll for a long time. And I really love the people, and I loved winning, and I loved being able to provide for my family. But I didn't feel like it was life affirming or fulfilling in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't feel like I was irreplaceable. I didn't feel like I was, just magnificent at it. And so it started to creep up where as I went along, it almost felt like I was wearing a mask that I made it through another year. I got some accolades. I have the 401k. I've got, the savings. I've done all of these things. I've checked all the boxes. And now, as every year went by, I was like, it felt worse and worse.
Yes.
It just felt worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, Cherylanne, I did one thing that really changed everything. So I had this podcast running in the background. I loved it. And it's an award-winning podcast. It's globally ranked. It's something I'm very, very proud of. It's called Late Learner. But I ended up, and this is probably really, really good for your audience to hear. There was a time, this was probably about 3 years ago, and every morning I would work out from 5 a.m. until 5:30 with a trainer. And that was it. The rest of my day was owed to somebody else, meaning I would get the kids ready. I would go to work. I would, kind of like slip in a podcast interview at noon, and I would get the kids from school and make sure they were fed and get them to bed. And I would work on podcast stuff. So it was like 4:30 in the morning until 9:30 at night. Every day was planned. And there was one week, and this was around this time, actually, it was around Christmas. My trainer was going out on vacation. And I was like, well, I love to work out. What should I do? So I start looking on ClassPass for like a HIIT workout or something similar. And I'm like, wait a minute. What do I want to do? What do I want to do? Not what should I do? And I thought, well, I always wanted to go do a dance class, and I have no dance background at all. And so I stumbled on a dance class. I felt like I was struck by lightning, and not because I picked it up. I'm a terrible dancer still, but it felt like I felt this intense rush, and it felt like freedom. It felt like I could open my arms wide and move and feel sexy, even though I didn't know my left foot from my right. And it was done in the dark, and everybody was sweaty. And it just was so cool that I wasn't in my head about, not knowing the moves perfectly. And it had taken over my body. And I remember hearing myself go, am I allowed to feel this good? Which is such a crazy question to ask. Why aren't I allowed to feel this good?
It's such a great question, though. Mm-hmm.
But I was used to feeling so bad and so stressed and so wound tight. And so this was like a signal that I was able to feel good. And so I kind of kept leaning into that. And then I ended up becoming a dance fitness instructor. And I was like, what if I can give this to other people? I know I'm not the only person that feels this way. I want other people to have this access.
Yes.
And that kind of opened everything for me to kind of lean into what feels good, what is nourishing, what is life-giving, where it became very clear that the podcast and the dance classes felt like a really big yes feeling in my body. And what felt like a really big no feeling was like the Sunday scaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And putting on the armor every Monday morning of just, how do I get through this? And I remember I would have like a crystal on my podcast, on my desk. It was black. It was supposed to mean, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it was supposed to mean like protection. And I would hold it. Obsidian, that was it. And I would hold it so tight. Like, how do I get through this day? And I'd look like it's 1:14. Can I make it the next 16 minutes? Can I make it? It felt like the mask was starting to come off. The more I felt good in the other ways,
the more you notice.
Like, the more I felt like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. So I left my corporate career. through a tarot reading, Cherylanne, because that's where you get all your answers.
That's where we go for the answers.
I somehow got my husband on board through a fortuitous tarot reading.
Wow.
And I made, I did some practical things, like we waited for some stocks to vest and left with no plan and said, I'm going to figure this out. So that was it.
Oh, such a good story. And thank you for sharing it in such a an arc where people can really feel that journey with you. I certainly have felt it as you've shared it with me over time. And I think there's a couple of moments in that stand out to me so much. One is whenever you say it felt like freedom. When you did the dance class, I did not know you were not a dancer. I would have bet my life that this was a rekindled passion. So the fact that you're like, I did something I really had never done before, and it felt like freedom. And you followed that nudge, which is extraordinary, right? And rare. And then I love how you looked at some of these other sort of non-traditional modalities. I guess non-traditional depends on who you are, but a tarot reading, to say this was a nudge. This was a really important intuitive nod to echo what I was feeling in my body, knowing that the podcast felt that was a big yes. And you were moving toward those yeses, that whole string. I hope as you're listening, that's what you're hearing, is that there wasn't a big pre-written plan saying, here's how I'm going to get from here to there in 5 years. But if you look at your life today versus your life 5 years ago, pre-podcast, pre-dance, pre-leaving your corporate life, I mean, there are a lot of pieces of it that are barely recognizable. And yet the core, your family, yourself, right? They remain. They've ported with you into this new kind of external reality. And I love that so much. Hi, it's Cherylanne. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. So one of the things that is super intriguing to me is that you've taken this spirit of exploration that you personally went through, and you've now translated it into your show. So you rebranded the show as the Late Learner Podcast.
Yes.
Such a great name. Such a great name. And I want you to tell people, what do you mean by late learner? What does that mean to you?
Well, the podcast has had 4 different names, and it used to be called, this is kind of funny, it used to be called Culture Changers, because it's always been how people feel like they want to make an impact. But the only way to make an impact is through what you learn. What you learn is different. And I have always been a late bloomer. I got married late. I had children late. I figured out that I was smart late. All of these things were not gifted to me as a young child, where it was easy to kind of follow this path. It's always been late learning. And so it used to be called Culture Changers. Nobody is Googling, how do I become a culture changer? And so it did become more of an exploration. I did find that it's always been the same type of show. And when I started it, you had asked about 5 years ago. I'm sure you were very different, but all those those nuggets of who you are were there. And that's true. And when I think about 5 years ago, it almost felt like a tiger in a cage, but I didn't have words to put to it, of just something has to come out that I don't feel like. I feel like burnout is a misalignment between your true desires and your daily activities. And my daily activities were a bunch of shoulds, right? Like a bunch of looking perfect, being the person that can get it all done. I've always prided myself on that identity of just being that person that could do it all and do it all well and look effortless and be the unfettered mom. That was really important to me in the beginning. And 5 years ago, I had a series of events where I had just turned, well, it was a little after I turned 40, where I had some really impactful births, with my kids, and an exposure to the maternal health care system that was really upsetting, that at this age and this year, it's still that way. And I was also volunteering at a school, an inner city school, where I was being exposed to systemic racism and oppression that I had never had any understanding or exposure to before. And then the political unrest that was happening all over, this division that I just couldn't shake.
Yes.
Like, how could I make this better? Like,
Yes.
I thought about, should I run for office? And it was like a hell no, but I really genuinely thought, like, how do I make more of an impact? So it was like this confluence of things where I was like, there's so much that I'm learning in real time that if other people like me learn this, we would act differently. We could come together and make a bigger impact together once we were exposed to what this looks like. And it wasn't like a conspiracy theory thing. It was just like, oh my goodness, this whole time I thought it was X, but really it is something else. And there has to be a better way. So Late Learner has always been inviting people who have new or less known frameworks or systems that people don't know about, or exposing people to stories that people don't talk about. So on one hand, it is giving a place for people to have a voice, but the other place is, how do I learn new modalities that just work better? And it's essentially like shattering the old paradigms that no longer work, but we all live within because it's easier. That's what's familiar. It is the generational progress that happens. But how do we expedite this? And it really is a knowledge of how do you heal yourself or find a better way that is simpler, but more effective, that once explained and once applied, your life gets better. And then you get to make that impact in your own communities, with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, and enjoy a better life. So that is how a Late Learner and what the podcast is all about.
And I love that works on two levels, that there's kind of the meta level of there are paradigms or ways of being that we all learned that were the norm, right? And we drank the Kool-Aid and said, yes, ma'am, and I will follow the rules.
Yeah.
Right. And there's an unlearning that allows you to kind of learn this alternate like operating system, almost other ways of thinking about, other philosophies of how to, like, what comes first? What are we really driving toward? Is it success? Is it fulfillment? And there's a lot of us kind of, I think, in a kind of rising chorus saying the same thing around that with our own voices. And I love that your podcast title works in the micro, which is this series of lessons of like things I am just now learning, things you are trying, experiences you are having that are new and different, and I think that is cool as well, that it's not just the big meta lesson. It's also like this micro lessons. I wonder if you could share at least one of the cool experiences that you've had, because I always feel like the much less cool sister when we have these conversations. You've tried some really intriguing things. Can you tell us like one story of something you gave yourself permission to try and how it went?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. When I left my corporate job, I made one decision, and that I was going to make no decisions until I could hear my own voice again. And honestly, it took months. So just like you were talking about, that programming and unlearning was really profound. And so I did a whole bunch of things like psychedelic assisted therapy and working with shaman. And I did traditional things as well. But also a lot of it was like solo overnight hikes and 12-hour walks and just, some of the endurance challenges. But I would say that there is one time when I was starting to get my bearings about me, of just saying, okay, this is the direction I want to go in. And I was going so hard, and I am really big on forcing myself to make things happen. There is no I love to just run at walls as fast as possible. And then I redirect like a video game, right? And I just move with force, right? And I decided I'm going to go this route, and it was burning me out again. And so I was like, okay, what do I need to do here? And I think at the time I was really looking towards everybody else that I did not have the answers. This was a really powerful message for me that I thought, if I don't feel good here, somebody else has a better answer. And I'm going to pay people. I don't have the wherewithal to find these answers by myself. When all of the really wise people around me are like, no, 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 you have the answers. Stop giving your power away. And so somebody had told me, Alison, I have been where you are before, and I know how it feels. And I said, well, how did you get out of it? And he said, I read this book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael A. Singer. So I was like, okay. So I read this book, and essentially it is kind of like surrendering instead of trying to control everything and white knuckle everything. And I gave myself permission to go to the tallest peak in North Carolina. It's like a 7,000 foot elevation, almost mountain in North Carolina, where I climbed it by myself solo and just said, let me just slow everything down and just take this one day and do it for me. And in the beginning, it was scary because there are all these signs for bears and bear sightings. And I'm like, I am not equipped or prepared. I'm not very, I'm not outdoorsy, even though I love being in the
ready
outdoors.
To go fight off a bear if necessary.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, this was a dumb idea. Why don't I have somebody with me? And you start to kind of hear those voices of just, why do you do this? And it just takes a moment where, and this is something that I teach in my community, is if you can get to a moment where you can actually feel your body start to regulate, because all of the nerves and the stress and everything was just amplified, especially when you're doing something new, and all the I don't want to say self-loathing, but like that chatter that is unhelpful, right? Why are you doing this? Why this is dumb? Why are you doing this? And it takes time, but when I'm in the woods, it felt like I met God on the mountain, honestly. That as I started to ascend and all of those nerves start to calm down, you can literally feel it melt away. And you realize I have everything. I have all the answers I need. And I'm getting chills because it was just such a powerful opportunity to just have that deep self-trust and know you're going to be okay. And so the mantra was, every single step was, you're getting stronger, you're getting stronger, you're getting stronger. Great job. You're doing this. You're doing it. You're doing it. You're doing it. And it really was self-fulfilling of like, your body is so healthy and so strong. So I would just thank my body, thank my knees. I had a ACL surgery a few years ago, and just thank my knees for being so strong to be able to take one step, and do it all by myself. There was like nobody on the trail, you know, and it just felt like, Cherylanne, it felt like freedom. It felt like freedom. And it felt like having all the answers that I didn't need a damn thing. I did not need a damn thing.
You just keep stringing together these experiences that feel like freedom. Like you're just stringing one onto the next, like a popcorn strand, and following more of the things that feel like freedom, they just feel so light. It's different than this heaviness of all the shoulds that you were describing. And I think the choice to say, it's a choice in today's culture to say, I am going to create space for that and I am going to trust it and follow it. And you're just a great shining example of the energy that comes on the other side. I think anyone who follows you or the people who do after meeting you on this show will see that there's this bright energy that is in your persona. And it's really, you curated that. It was in you all along, right? But there's nothing sort of covering it up now. That you were talking before about a mask, and that ability to just let that light kind of emanate is so clear. And I'm so proud of you for just continuing to string these choices together, and then so grateful that you share them back with all of us and with your broader community. It's wonderful. I know that you are going to keep doing the podcast, right? And you also have started doing some programming for women. And I want you to tell them about the New Year challenge that you are inviting them into.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things. So in December, I always do a clearing challenge. And essentially, it's like clear everything out, but not just physically, mentally, spiritually. So it's really being intentional. And then once you have more room, you want to recharge, right? Like you want to recharge. And part of the recharge is by doing something new. And you had touched on it just a moment ago that it's really micro choices have macro impact. So what do those micro choices do? Like our brains are programmed for new and novel. You know, they even say, I don't know if you've been in a long-term relationship or been in a marriage. So I've been married to my husband for 11 years, 11 and a half years. We've been together for about 14, 15 years. And what do you do to keep it new and novel? And some of it can be so simple. It doesn't have to be this grand gesture. It could even be something as small as having a picnic on your living room floor and just lighting candles and doing something different, or going to Waffle House because it's fun and campy, you know? So it could be those things of like, how do you, once you establish what values you have of the things that mean the most to you. And most of the time, those are your relationships to your kids, the relationships to your spouse, your relationships to your best friends. And those are probably the best friends that you probably keep putting off from hanging out with because you're so busy and they're so busy and they're going to be there. But it can weigh on you of like, keep pushing them off because I have so much I should be doing, Mm-hmm. And so what does it mean to be intentional about putting those things front and center that mean the most to you? And most importantly, the relationship to yourself, which most of the time, let's be honest, we usually put that all the way at the bottom of the list. So what does that look like? So I put together a New Year challenge where every single day, it's 31 days of doing something new, something small. So they're just ideas and something fun.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy for people to grab onto.
Yeah.
Love it. So we're going to point them to AlisonHare.com/new. And I'll link that in the show notes as well. So we don't have to deal with spelling challenges, which are always the hardest part about our names, right? I'm like, listen, mine is impossible. Also, please check out the Late Learner podcast. You can listen to that anywhere that you find your podcasts, including this one. And I'll also link the book that you mentioned by Michael Singer, The Surrender Experiment. It sounds like it was particularly meaningful for you. And I'm sure someone will want to remember that name and be able to check that out. Any parting words for our listeners today?
I think a great bit of advice, if you could, is what does it look like to shine brighter? And like allow the parts of you that you feel so proud of. What does it look like to turn that up instead of tone it down? So it usually is shine brighter.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Alison. I love giving everybody the chance to get to know you a little bit today.
Thank you, Cherylanne. It's been a joy.
Okay, thanks for sticking with us through that episode. As promised, I am going to link up in the show notes to the resources that will help you find your way to Alison and to her work. And if you are new to the Brilliant Balance Show and just discovering this community, I hope that you will stay tighter connected to us by joining the Brilliant Balance group in Facebook. Just head on over to Facebook, go to groups, click Brilliant Balance, and we will welcome you with open arms. That's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is the podcastfactory.com.